It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The Chancellor insists that the UK has to live within its means as she unveils more cuts to benefits.
There are no quick fixes, but we have taken the right choices, returning stability to our economy after years of mismanagement by the party opposite.
But there's dissent from Labour and anger from families as the government's own figures show thousands of children will be pushed into poverty.
With PIP benefits, it's for people that need extra help because they're ill. So why would they target that? I'm confused.
Also tonight, President Trump's supporters go on the attack as more details of the security breach by his top team are revealed.
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you from?
From the UK?
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting.
Plus, Prince Harry quits his African AIDS charity over infighting. We speak to one trustee who has also walked away. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. As she delivered her spring statement on the state of the nation's finances, the Chancellor proudly told MPs that she was on track to meet her target to get public spending under control and to reduce debt 2 years ahead of schedule. But the price of Rachel Reeves's insistence on sticking to her fiscal rules is now clear. The government's own figures show her cuts to benefits will make 3 million families worse off and push 250,000 people, including children, into poverty. It's led to disquiet, if not yet rebellion, on Labour's backbenchers. But despite that and the halving of this year's growth forecast, the Chancellor insists her plans will secure the UK's economic future. Our first report tonight comes from our political editor, Beth Rigby.
If she's feeling the pressure, it doesn't show. A Chancellor in a very tight spot, but smiling still as she faces up to a government with less money and hard choices to make. This wasn't a budget, but it felt like it.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Red pen all over her economic plans.
Now our task is to secure Britain's future in a world that is changing before our eyes.
More money then for defence and no stepping back from her rule to fund day-to-day government spending from tax receipts, not borrowing, by the end of the decade.
I said that our fiscal rules were non-negotiable, and I meant it. I said it at the election, I said it at the budget, and I say it again today.
But since the election and budget, the economy's taken a turn for the worse. This, the hard truth.
The OBR have today revised down our growth forecast for 2025, from 2% in the autumn to 1% today. I am not satisfied with these numbers, and that is why we on this side of the House are serious about taking the action needed to grow our economy.
Growth down, debt repayment costs up, the Chancellor filling the black hole in her fiscal plans with a £14 billion repair job, including £4.8 billion of welfare cuts.
If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. That cannot be right, and we will not stand for it. It is a waste of their potential, and it is a waste of their futures, and we will change it.
The harsh reality, 3.2 million families hit financially, losing on average around £1,700 a year.
These plans mean that welfare spending as a share of GDP will fall between 2026 and the end of the forecast period.
But the Chancellor at pains to prove her plan is working, and this rabbit of sorts had her beaming. The government's controversial planning reforms forecast to add nearly £7 billion to the economy.
The OBR have today concluded that these reforms will permanently increase the level of real GDP. That is the biggest positive growth impact that the OBR have ever reflected in their forecast.
This a Chancellor grasping at any good news.
Delivering security for our country and security for working people. And I commend this statement to the House.
A proud and pleased-looking Prime Minister, but the Tories pinning economic failure firmly on her.
This Chancellor constantly trying to blame forces beyond her control. The right response is not to duck responsibility, but to build a resilient economy. And now we are all paying the price of her broken promises. Today's numbers confirm it. We are poorer and we are weaker.
A Chancellor who raised $40 billion in taxes but 5 months ago at the budget, now coming back for more, this time in spending cuts. Is it time for you to level with people and admit that your plan hasn't protected them? And the truth is that you are going to have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the budget in October.
We did have to make a number of difficult decisions on tax and welfare and on spending in the budget last year, but we have now wiped the slate clean. There's lots of speculation that I was going to change taxes today. The Tories were desperate to call this an emergency budget. It was far from it. We have found efficiencies in public spending.
So you're not coming back for more?
Well, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets. I've just delivered a spring statement today, but I think you can see through this spring statement how determined I am, how determined this government is to live within the means that we set ourselves.
But back in the House of Commons, the welfare cuts divide in the Chancellor's own benches.
Making cuts instead of taxing wealth is a political choice, and taking away the personal independence payments from so many disabled people is an especially cruel choice.
It is not right that disabled people and the most vulnerable in our society should pay for that.
This perhaps a sign of things to come as the Chancellor faces into the clamour of welfare cuts at home and a global economy packed with risk. Many noises off, and so much that could still knock her off course. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
So what impact will the Chancellor's plans really have on the economy? Our economics and data editor Ed Conway has this analysis.
Right, let's start with the big figure, GDP growth, economic growth, and just how well the economy is doing. This is how fast the economy looked like it was growing last time around. 2% growth this year, 1.8, 1.5 in the coming years. Here is how it has changed. So a big downgrade this year, down from 2% to 1%. That has consequences, but this is the thing the Chancellor's been focusing on, upgrades in the future years. And in part, that's because the Office of Budget Responsibility, which comes up with these figures, thinks that some of her growth-related reforms are actually going to bear fruit. So that's the good news. But the bad news is there's potentially more borrowing to come. And this is where it really matters. She has a couple of these fiscal rules, and the most important of them is that she needs to get the current budget, which is basically day-to-day spending, down away from its deficit that it has at the moment towards a surplus by the end of this 5-year forecast. Last time, she was heading for a £9.9 billion surplus, so that was the headroom people talk about. This time, look at the updated figures. Lo and behold, it's still £9.9 billion. In fact, it's not just £9.9 billion, it's £9.93 billion, which is exactly the same it was to 2 decimal places as it was last time around, which might lead you to think nothing has changed. But beneath the surface, an awful lot has changed, OK? Let's have a look at what has been going on. That's the £9.9 billion. That's the headroom she had against her fiscal rule. It was actually wiped out. You wouldn't have guessed this, but it's wiped out by the fact that you've got higher debt interest costs and that weaker growth we were talking about a second ago. So she's had to do some stuff. She's had to include some extra efficiency, tax efficiency, anti-evasion models, which bring it up a few £billion. She's switched some spending from aid to defence. That also benefits this because it's current spending, which is most prevalent when it comes to aid. So you've got less of that. She's done some spending cuts, big spending cuts. You'll see that in a second. And also those welfare cuts. Now, last time when the government talked about those welfare cuts, they said it was going to bring in about £5 billion or save about £5 billion. But actually, no. The OBR's come along and said, no, it's going to be less than that. Even so, lo and behold, they get to that magic £9.9 billion figure. But what along the way are the consequences? Think about what's going on with those welfare changes. Getting rid of the personal independence payment, or rather changing the way, the eligibility for the personal independence payment, that means 50,000 children, 250,000 adults potentially go into poverty. So you're raising poverty, pushing children into poverty, not to mention adults as well. Those universal credit changes, another 50,000 adults into poverty. Tot it all up. And it's at least 350,000 extra people in poverty that weren't potentially going there before. So there are consequences in getting to that £9.9 billion. Spending too. This is what Jeremy Hunt was planning to spend in the coming years, about 1% increases in current spending. This is what Rachel Reeves was planning last time around. Look critically here. She didn't want to have as low spending totals as Jeremy Hunt. But now, the latest figures suggest she will be spending about the same as Jeremy Hunt was in terms of the annual increase by the end of this forecast horizon. So that's significant as well, and all to try to get to that £9.9 billion. She has got there. This is the headroom. If you look at the latest figure there, she's managed to avoid breaking her fiscal rule. But now take a step back and you'll note that given that this is way less headroom than most chancellors have had in the past, we may, who knows, in a few months' time, being having quite the same conversation about headroom all over again.
Ed Conway there. Well, the government says its plans will make people better off, on average, by £500 a year from 2029. But in the meantime, campaigners are warning that cuts to benefits will have a hugely harmful effect on millions of families. And the government's own figures suggest thousands of children will be pushed into poverty. Becky Johnson has this report.
Far from the growth Labour promised, tens of thousands of children will be tipped into poverty by welfare cuts. Here in Wolverhampton, there's an uneasy sense the poorest are being forced to bear the brunt of the nation's financial woes.
With PIP benefits, it's for people that need extra help because they're ill. So why would they target that? I'm confused.
The government would argue it's about getting more people into work.
Yeah, which is a good thing, is what they need and what people need. But how are they going to help getting people back in work? By making them cuts.
Philippa has diabetes, but her recent application for the disability benefit PIP was rejected. She wants to appeal, but doesn't hold out much hope.
It's always a certain section of the community that gets targeted, and it's always those that are on low incomes.
Do you feel targeted by this?
I do.
So will you now be looking for a job if you can't get these?
Not now, because my son's got disability living allowance, which means I can become his carer, and that's the opt-out of getting a job. I've never had to look into ways of avoidance.
Many of the families who come to this community centre are struggling.
Would cutting those benefits encourage more people to go to work, do you think?
I think that when it comes to work, if you could still work on certain benefits, that would be more impressive.
Do you think they're put off working in case they lose their benefits?
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely.
And that's what the government's trying to change.
This is all about trying to get more people back to work to tackle the ballooning bill for welfare. It's intended to reform a system where people signed off sick get more in benefits than job seekers, incentivising people to opt out of work. But the consequence is many people who desperately need the money will also lose out.
Former social worker Winston relies on his benefits to cover the basics. He says he'll really struggle if his payments are reduced.
Well, losing that money is going to have a major impact on us because we're just about managing now.
So you're going to have to restrict heating and which food you buy?
Yeah, you're going to have to restrict and cut right back.
If more people are forced back into work, the government will have achieved its aim. But at what cost to those pushed deeper into poverty? Becky Johnson, Sky News, Wolverhampton.
Well, let's go live now to Downing Street and our political editor, Beth Rigby. Well, this was never going to be pain-free, Beth, clawing back some wriggle room or headroom, as it's called. But uncertainty now lingers. Will she have to come back for more? And what will Labour MPs do about it?
Well, Anna, she's got through the day. It was clearly a difficult day and it is pretty calm tonight, but that doesn't mean there are not serious headwinds for this Chancellor. on the politics of it, a Chancellor, a Labour Chancellor, standing up, announcing billions of welfare cuts that will affect 3.2 million families on universal credit and push, by the government's own estimates, 300,000 more people into relative poverty. I don't need to tell you that that is uncomfortable territory for a Labour Chancellor and the Labour movement. And of course there is disquiet amongst MPs tonight, but I do think on balance the Chancellor has bought herself a bit of time. One senior MP saying to me that while MPs are unhappy about all of this, they do understand that she is trying to fix the finances. But of course, she's going to run into trouble in the coming months as these cuts are rolled out and people digest what it really means, not just here in Westminster, but when they have to go and face constituents back home. And then the economic headwinds. This is really tricky. She found 14 billion to repair the public finances, but this is, if you like, a holding pattern, a quick fix. When I asked her at that press conference, isn't the truth that you are going to have to come back for more, be that tax rises or further spending cuts, she just did not rule it out. And why? Because of the volatility in the wider economy, the global economy, the threat of trade wars, the potential for economic shocks. She just does not have that much headroom to play with, and it could be that in a few months' time she's got to come back again at the budget. And this is where the rubber hits the road, because when you talk to Labour MPs, they might be able to swallow these cuts for now, but what they're talking about now is if she needs to come back for more, it has to be revenue raising, i.e. it has to be tax increases. All of that is extremely difficult for her. So while she performed a repair job today, she has in no way fixed the economy or the economic outlook, and things could just get harder still for Rachel Reeves in the months to come.
Beth Rigby, live for us there in Downing Street. Thank you. Well, one of those headwinds is tariffs, and in what is likely to be a blow for the UK economy, President Trump has announced tonight that all cars imported into the United States are to be subjected to tariffs of 25%.
They've taken so much out of our country, friend and foe, and frankly, friend has been oftentimes much worse than foe. And this is very modest. And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. We start off with a 2.5% base, which is what we were at, and we go to 25%.
Well, let's go live to Washington and our correspondent, David Blevins. And David, we've had reaction from the EU tonight, deeply regretting this action. But it's not good news for car makers either here in the UK.
It certainly isn't. The UK exports more cars than anything else to the United States. It accounted for a staggering £8 billion of sales last year. We're talking high-end brands like Bentley and Rolls-Royce, Land Rover, Jaguar, Aston Martin. And analysts are predicting a 7% drop in those sales. But it's also bad news for American consumers, because these tariffs are going to have an impact on US dealerships that sell foreign cars. And beyond that, it's going to have an impact on American car makers, because they rely heavily on foreign parts. So it's going to push up the price of American cars too by up to $10,000. So you can see why the markets dropped to an all-time low yesterday when the president hinted that he was going to do this. The markets are very volatile over his tariffs policy, because one day he's imposing them, the next day lifting them. Businesses don't know how to prepare, and consumers are very concerned that ultimately it is they who are going to pay the price. Of course, Anna, there's another reason why the president right now may want to talk about tariffs. A case of look here, don't look over there, because his administration finds itself embroiled in the first proper scandal of his presidency over how officials handled highly sensitive information relating to US airstrikes on Houthi rebels.
David Blevins, live there in Washington. Thank you. Well, as David mentioned, the Trump administration has been on the attack after new details emerged of how his top team accidentally shared details of airstrikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen with a journalist. The reporter in question, Jeffrey Goldberg, today released the full group chat involving Mr Trump's senior team, including when the wave of strikes would start. Well, today the White House attempted to discredit Mr Goldberg again and again insisted that the post did not contain any classified information. Here's our US correspondent, Martha Kellner.
Another day, another development in the scandal engulfing this White House. The Atlantic magazine, whose editor was inadvertently added to a Signal group chat, now revealing the texts it says are attack plans. And on the defence, the president.
I don't know that Signal works. I think Signal could be defective, to be honest with you.
New details released by The Atlantic show senior Trump officials discussing strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz added journalist Jeffrey Goldberg to the group chat called Houthi PC Small Group. In the hours before the US strikes, Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth gives details of the attack. Time now, he tells the group. Weather is favourable, just confirmed. We are a go for mission launch. He then lays out the plan. Target terrorist is at his known location, he writes, so should be on time. He informs the group that at 14:15, the first bombs will definitely drop. Hegseth concludes with a reference to the operational security of the strike. The White House and the most senior members of the group chat now aligned in their pushback.
There were no locations, no sources or methods revealed, and there were certainly no war plans discussed.
Nobody's texting war plans. There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths.
Is it classified, the information?
Well, the Pentagon says it was not.
I had the opportunity to serve in Baghdad and Kuwait.
But this Major General says classified information is exactly what those texts were.
There's a lot of quibbling about whether these are called war plans, attack plans. The important thing is every single mother, father, husband, wife needs to know that if the enemy had had that information, their loved one may have been shot down or killed as a result of this blatant disregard for using the correct communications for our military.
The White House is digging in and reading straight from the MAGA playbook, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Do you believe that this was classified information that was shared on that group?
No, the administration has said it is not classified information. I think this is a continuance of someone like you to try to push an issue that isn't even relevant. Yeah. Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
Do you care about American lives being put at risk?
Let me tell you something. Do you care about people from your country? What about all the women that are raped by migrants?
Team Trump's crisis management strategy: deny, deflect and denigrate the press. Is this an exercise in deflection?
This would be an exercise in you worrying about your own country.
This administration wishes this scandal would disappear, but in order for it to do so, heads may have to roll. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Washington, D.C.
Prince Harry says he is devastated and in shock to have to quit as a patron of a charity that he set up in honour of his mother, Princess Diana. He established Centre Bali with Prince Siso of Lesotho to help young people with HIV and AIDS in southern Africa. The Duke of Sussex says he was forced to walk away following a dispute between the organisation's chair and its board of trustees. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, has more.
You can't underestimate the significance of Centre Bali for Prince Harry, so much so that it was at one of their events that he broke his silence in the week after he announced he was stepping away from royal life.
What I want to make clear is we're not walking away, and we certainly aren't walking away from you.
Now we know he's had to step away from the charity. In a joint statement with Prince Siso, they said, "With heavy hearts, we've resigned from our roles as patrons of the organisation until further notice, in support of and solidarity with the Board of Trustees who've had to do the same." It's not clear exactly what's gone on, but Chair Sophie Chandauka appears to take a direct hit at Harry in her statement. She said, "There are people in this world who behave as though they're above the law and mistreat people and then play the victim card and use the very press they disdain to harm people who have the courage to challenge their conduct." We spoke to Dr. Kelly in Lesotho. He's been around since the charity was first set up, was made a member of the Board of Trustees a few years ago and has just resigned. The chair has made some incredibly serious allegations in her statement, including allegations of harassment, bullying, misogyny. As one of the trustees, how do you respond to those allegations?
I can honestly say, in my experience, in the meetings I was present in, there was never even a hint of such. The general tone and conduct of the board has been one of respect for each other, accommodating each other's opinions and inputs, and speaking with respect to each other. So this all came as a shock to me when I heard.
The charity is now being looked at by the Charities Commission.
All the trustees that were on his board were high-profile, high-achieving, very capable people. And it's extraordinary to see such a catastrophic divergence, putting the whole charity at risk.
But after what has been a turbulent 5 years, it is amazing when you think that the Invictus Games and Centre Bali were the main things that Harry had taken away with him. After giving up his military affiliations, his royal patronages, his royal duties, and some would say his family. The King and Prince William were out doing what the monarch and the heir should do.
These two don't need that much instructions.
Overshadowed yet again by someone who isn't a working member of the royal family. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Sky News understands the Chinese owner of British Steel has rejected a £55 million government rescue package in a move which raises fresh concerns about thousands of jobs. The offer, aimed at facilitating the Scunthorpe-based group's transition to green steel production, was made by the Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds on Monday. The proposal follows years of talks aimed at salvaging the future of the UK's second biggest steel producer. Ukraine and Russia have accused each other of breaking an agreement to pause attacks on each other's energy infrastructure. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in Paris ahead of a European summit tomorrow to discuss ending the conflict. At least 24 people have died and more than 28,000 others have been forced from their homes as wildfires rage out of control in South Korea. 10,000 firefighters have been deployed to try to control the fires, which have destroyed hundreds of buildings, including part of an ancient Buddhist temple. The University of Sussex has been fined £585,000 by the higher education regulator for failing to uphold freedom of speech. The Office for Students said the university's policy requirement to positively represent trans people could prevent staff and students from voicing opposing views. It follows the case of Professor Kathleen Stock, who left the university back in 2021 after being accused of transphobia for her views on sex and gender issues. Sky's Alice Porter has more.
She was accused of transphobia for her beliefs on sex and gender. Professor Kathleen Stock resigned in 2021 after protesters at the University of Sussex called for her to be fired. She was advised by police to have CCTV on her home. Such was the concern for her safety. Now the university has been fined after an investigation by the Office for Students.
We cannot have a sector where academics feel afraid to express their views. Said that, we did have strong evidence, not only from what Professor Stock said, but also from what we'd seen about the documentation and also how the policies have been adopted and the clear documentary evidence as to the processes for adopting them, that there were breaches of our requirements and that these attracted a fine.
The regulator's report said Sussex University's trans and non-binary equality policy statement failed to uphold freedom of speech and academic freedom.
Generally, what I find more worrying is when, institutions have sort of listened to the protesters and take that voice through into their institutions and then basically become propaganda machines for a particular point of view, and then everyone else in that institution feels they can't say what they want to say.
The Office for Students say the policy of the University of Sussex could lead to students and staff self-censoring. But people we've spoken to here say freedom of speech is protected on campus.
I definitely think that this university advocates freedom of speech a lot.
I think everyone does censor themselves a bit just because they want to respect other people's points of view.
A student and now I'm a staff, but I never felt that freedom of speech is just suppressed here.
This is the largest fine ever issued to a university. Sussex Uni say the judgment is unlawful and will challenge it in a judicial review.
It makes it almost impossible for universities to have any policies that will control how people speak or relate to each other on campus. It's free speech absolutism, puts free speech above all else.
Championing academic freedom while respecting the rights of minority groups is a challenge for universities. This fine will certainly send shockwaves across the higher education sector. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the Telegraph's comment editor Annabel Denham. Welcome to both of you. So, among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times, no surprises. The headline there, tax rise fears cloud Reeves's fiscal fix. That and more when we come back.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The Chancellor has confirmed the UK growth forecast has been halved, and cuts in welfare, which could push an extra 250,000 people into poverty. The Trump administration has gone on the attack after new details emerged of how his top team accidentally shared details of airstrikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen with a journalist. And Prince Harry says he is devastated and in shock after deciding to quit as patron of a charity that he set up in honour of his mother. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman, and the Telegraph's comment editor, Annabel Denham. Welcome and great to see both of you. So, one story dominating, as you might expect, the newspapers. Let's take a look. The Financial Times, then, kicking off, says the Chancellor's efforts to fix the public finances in her spring statement have been clouded by fears that taxes could go up. The Times suggests Rachel Reeves will be forced to raise taxes further or cut spending if Trump imposes tariffs on Britain. A simple headline from the Telegraph: 5 years of record taxes. The Express declares reckless Rachel tanks economy by killing growth. Analysis seen by the Eye suggests the measures announced today could push 250,000 people into poverty thanks to benefit changes. The anger at those changes is reflected here too on the front page of the Metro. In the Mirror, Rachel Reeves is accused of balancing the books on the backs of the poor by a union boss. Similar headline for The Guardian too. Reeves accused of balancing the books at the expense of the poor. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail with the headline deluded. Meanwhile, Caleb Cooper, one of the most famous names in British farming, thanks to his involvement in Clarkson's farm, has invited Prince William to come on the show. And according to The Star, we're going towards the time of year when seagulls make the biggest nuisance of themselves. There we go. Jenny Kleeman, Annabel Denham are here with us. Wow, that's quite an interesting set of newspapers, isn't it? So, should we start with the Eye? The question is whether more is on the way, be they tax hikes or extra cuts, because she's claimed some wriggle room, about 14 billion. We'll talk about the impact of that in a minute. But that's still not much, is it, Annabel?
No, it isn't. It's the kind of amount that could be blown off course very quickly, particularly between now and the October budget, which is why so many front-page splashes are talking about the likelihood of further tax increases in October, despite the fact that in the aftermath of the October 2024 budget, Rachel Reeves insisted she would not be coming back for more. I think that was in last December. But look, what did we learn today? Well, the growth forecast, according to the fiscal watchdog, the OBR, has been halved for 2025 from 2% to 1%. The tax burden, because growth is shrinking, is now forecast to reach an even higher proportion of GDP, 37.7%. Let's not forget that actually under the previous Conservative government, it was already forecast to go up to around 37.1%. How is she restoring some of the fiscal headroom which was lost in the aftermath of the October budget? Well, there's welfare reform and there are cuts to day-to-day government spending, specifically the civil service. But ultimately, the Chancellor has ended up back where she started, and some of the newspapers on centre-right-leaning newspapers are saying that she's deluded, and I think that is because there does seem to be a gulf between what she actually stood up and said, and the realities facing the UK economy.
Yes, 14 billion is the figure she clawed back. It takes her back to about 9.9 billion of headroom, which, given what's happening with Trump and tariffs, more announcements on that, certainly tonight, may not be enough. So the point being tax hikes, extra cuts on the way. But right now, the benefits changes is also on the front page of many newspapers, including the Eye there. 250,000 people pushed into poverty by benefits squeeze. The Guardian as well. Reeves accused of balancing the books at the expense of the poor. And this is difficult for Labour supporters to stomach, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, of course, this comes from the government's own impact statement, the government's own figures. It's to do with tightening up the rules on PIP and the health element of universal credit. And, The issue is that the opposition that the government is finding is coming from its own benches. I mean, Mel Stride was not very strong in the Commons today. Most of the blowback that they're getting is from their own MPs who are finding this incredibly difficult to stomach. It goes against everything the Labour Party is supposed to stand for. And until we have the autumn budget, we don't know what tax rises there may be. She says there's not going to be any tax rises, but it is very difficult for a lot of Labour MPs to countenance the idea that there are so many welfare cuts for the poor and there aren't tax rises for the rich, for corporations like Apple, for example, who are doing very well at the moment. The idea that any growth that may be, any silver lining that may be on the horizon is because of planning reform is an interesting one. It's Angela Rayner, really, who's come out of this well and had a good day. But any of this could be wiped out by the 2nd of April when we find out what Trump's plans are on tariffs. So things are very, very precarious. And the thing that's particularly worrying is it's alienating the traditional Labour base.
Absolutely. And, what is interesting is that even Ed Davey of the Lib Dems says we all want to get people back to work in terms of welfare, but to do it on the backs of disabled people, is that really the right way round? Lots of quotes here. For example, Paul Kissack, Group Chief Executive of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, accusing the Chancellor of putting the burden of the changing world on the shoulders of those least able to bear the load. The government needs to protect people from harm with the same zeal as it attempts to build its reputation for fiscal competence. Thousands of those listed are children, children who have no choice about this. Will it have, the Mirror's with the same thing, balancing the books on the backs of the poor. Will there be a rebellion, do you think? Will Labour MPs have their say on this?
I think in some ways the comms is quite smart from the Labour Party in that a lot of the announcements were made last week, and perhaps Rachel Reeves did not go quite so far today in her spring statement as some had feared. Look, no Labour MP is going to come into government expecting to or wanting to cut welfare, but unfortunately that is this fiscal situation that we now find ourselves in, and the welfare bill is set to absolutely balloon by the end of this Parliament. And the government does need to find ways of cutting it. It needs to find ways of ensuring that those who can work do work, even if they're only able to work part-time, that the government is actually incentivising and supporting those people into jobs. As Rachel Reeves repeated often this afternoon, it's supposedly the party of working people, despite the fact that it's slapping that massive increase on national insurance contributions, which will have a knock-on impact on jobs. But nevertheless, it will be painful for those who are going to see some of their benefits withdrawn, and I think at the moment there's a great deal of uncertainty for those people, and that's something that the Labour are going to need to get out in front of.
And it's a simple equation for the Metro. The suggestion that benefit cuts will push 250,000 people into poverty, while the money goes to £2 billion on defence. I know, the aid budget was intended to do that. And the assessment by the government, 370,000 current recipients of PIPs, these personal independent payments, will lose those payments. In terms of those who might claim in the future, 430,000 people will lose. But Rachel Reeves, categoric today, 1,000 people extra each day are claiming these personal independence payments, which is a figure which is utterly unsustainable, is her argument.
Yes, and she's also arguing that the investment that they're making in trying to get people back into work is going to counteract the worst of some of these figures. Of course it is unsustainable, but so much of this is of the government's own making. They have created a rod for their own backs in terms of the very stringent fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has imposed. She does not have this headroom for herself. Keir Starmer himself, in opposition, said that he wanted growth to be at 2.5%. This is therefore a benchmark that is always going to be there, that he will always be measured against. And all of the predictions look like this is pretty much unachievable, given the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has set.
But I do think, there's an important point to be made here, which is that overall welfare spending is still going to increase by around, the previous estimate was around £20 billion by the end of this Parliament in terms of the changes that Labour were going to bring in. And she's just cutting that by £4.8 billion. So it is still going to be increasing enormously. And I think she's going to need to find, she's going to find that she's going to need to do more on the spending side of the ledger.
Well, yeah, that's welfare. Let's go on to spending, as in well, in this case, trying to find the money to spend more, which is taxes, which is the Daily Telegraph's taken it. 5 years of record taxes. A lot of this seems to be driven by Paul Johnson of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who basically says she's gained a bit of wriggle room, headroom, but it's nowhere near enough, given the buffeting headwinds coming, not least from America. He suggests that actually we've now given ourselves another 6 months of uncertainty while people wait to speculate on the taxes that are to come. And we had uncertainty from July to October last year, which did not do the economy well. He says she's left herself a small headroom only for unexpected extra costs and has left herself at the mercy of events. All of that adds to uncertainty around policy. There is a cost, both economic and political, to that uncertainty. The government will suffer the political cost. We will suffer the economic cost. So that's, you know, what's reflected here in these papers, Jenny.
Yes, and it's, you know, the attack line is constantly going to be on this government, that they have they have gambled their entire financial strategy on the idea that there is going to be growth and serious growth. But, you know, as the Telegraph says here, there is now not a single year in this decade that the Labour government will hit economic growth of 2%, according to the OBR. So, you know, they are paying the price of having made this gamble. If it's not going to come from growth, then it's going to have to come from taxes.
Yes, and the Financial Times, again, tax rise fears cloud Reeves's fiscal fix is the headline. Story underneath, though, which is picked up also by the Times, in fact, Brussels expects tariffs of about 20% as US sticks to its guns in last-ditch talks. Well, we know tonight that imports of cars and light vehicles into America are subject to tariffs. It will impact the European Union, which tonight has declared it's deeply upset by this, or deeply regrets, I think the line is. The Times suggests that, you know, the buffeting will come from America. It will impact our car industry, presumably, won't it? So this is, you know, this is the tricky situation, the global situation in which we are, or the Chancellor is operating.
Yes, the expectation is that this is going to be very punishing for the EU. We don't yet know what the exact situation will be for the UK. Donald Trump has accused the European Union of freeloading, that he's argued that there hasn't been a fair deal between the two massive trading blocs when it comes to imports of vehicles in particular. And now he's looking at ways that he can reciprocate some of the tariffs that have been imposed on US manufacturers, and that won't simply be exclusively affecting those manufacturers, but also pharmaceutical companies and tech companies.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of lines, you know, dropping right now. A White House official expects Congress to pass a measure giving tax breaks to Americans who buy American cars. You know, this idea of driving up manufacturing in America, and also it's on car parts as well. And we know, you know, we've seen Ed Conway's reporting, haven't we, that the car parts go from Mexico to Canada, into America, out again. So, you know, it's going to impact them as well. You know, possibly $10,000, they say, per vehicle in America. We've got so much more to talk about, haven't we? Good job we're coming back for more a bit later on. Next up, those senior Trump administration officials still insisting there was nothing classified in their leaked group chat messages. We'll discuss that from The Guardian and elsewhere, no doubt, in just a moment.
I want to start the programme today with a name, a story that I can't get out of my head. The campaign has now started. This is your chance. Tell people. This is the Politics Hub. It's not correct. The tax burden is projected to go up.
No,
but I'm not. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous.
No one does care about us.
I'm really interested in that. On the Politics Hub, you like to push the boundaries. He's got the majority. The question is, what is he going to do with it?
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Jenny Kleeman and Annabel Denham. Welcome back to both of you. The extraordinary story of the attack plans, not war plans, remember, which have been released in full. What a read they are. And still denials coming from the White House and all who reside in it. US group chat included key Yemen raid details, and yet it's not classified, Jenny.
Yes. I mean, I wonder what it takes for something to be classified. This story is amazing, and perhaps it's particularly amazing for journalists because we're all imagining, what if we picked up our phones and saw that we were included in a group chat like this? But yes, this is because they annoyed the Atlantic. Hegseth originally saying that the Atlantic were completely discredited and you know, we shouldn't believe that that Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor, was included in this group chat at all, and then eventually it being conceded that he had been included. But the explanation being it's OK because nothing classified was said. According to what was released today, Hegseth is quoted in this group chat talking about fighter planes being launched, talking about targets being hit in real time. If this is not classified, I don't really understand, you know, what would be.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Here we are.
So 210, more F-18s launched, second strike package, strike drones on target. Oh, you've zoomed in. I can't read that bit now.
Too big.
You're going down, you're going down. This is when the first bombs will definitely drop, pending earlier trigger-based targets.
I mean, this seems pretty sensitive stuff. And the thing that's interesting is we're living in this post-truth world where the you know, Secretary of State and the Defence Minister and God knows who else can stand up and say it's not true, we didn't add them, and then it can be proved that it is true. And the thing is, the Atlantic has the receipts. They have them, so they put them all out there. And you know, I don't know if it was incredibly clever strategy that they decided to not release it all at first. But you know, Jeffrey Goldberg had said initially that he decided not to release them all because he didn't want to compromise national security. Well, now he has.
Sequencing for maximum effect.
Is that what it is?
Exactly. Only got a minute left. Do you mind doing the last story for us, which is it broke about this time last night, in fact, which is Harry and his charity set up to honour his mother. You know, bullying claims now, it emerges.
Yes, it feels as though this story is just escalating and escalating. Prince Harry seems to have been accused of playing the victim. He's obviously quit this charity, which was set up nearly 20 years ago to help young people in South Africa. It sounds like many members of the charity had either fallen out with or lost confidence in the chairwoman over the last couple of years, the direction that she was taking the charity into. But look, this is heat on Prince Harry, which he is not going to want at this stage. It's not long after it was announced, or the court ruled, that files on his visa form and his comments on drug use related to his migration to America those are now going to be released. Obviously, you've had Meghan's documentary, which has been subject to pretty widespread ridicule. Many think it's about as good.
So, saying it, but I do.
You just wonder whether the Sussexes seem to have the reverse Midas touch, and this is just again.
It's hard work being a famous royal, isn't it? It has to be said. Jenny and Annabelle, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. See you for more at 11. Here's the weather, though, now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So cooler, more unsettled to end the week, but England and Wales look mostly fine and warm again tomorrow. So mainly fine if chilly start with local frost and fog. The north and west will be milder, cloudier and windier. Some rain from the northwest of Ireland through to central Scotland. Central Scotland, Northern Ireland and the northwestern half of Ireland will see outbreaks of rain becoming more extensive during the morning. Most other places look fine, although quite cloudy in the west, but there may be the odd spot of rain near southern Irish sea coast. It'll be cooler in the north, still warm elsewhere, but the wind will pick up in the north and the west. Rain then will extend to all of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland later, becoming heavier and more persistent.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Well, our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. Official predictions say 250,000 people will be pushed into poverty following the Chancellor's spring statement. Analysis and details next.